In every human action, we see pieces of the human spirit which exist in all of us. Woven through life and death, the crimes which plague and haunt humanity are connected to the flaws we find in our own souls. The penalty of capital punishment is reserved for those crimes which reveal the darkest depravity of human nature. This video consults the nature of capital punishment. It is both an analysis and a story about the complexities of crime and punishment. To begin this story, I need to position my own narrative in the context of what the death penalty means and how it works. I grew up in the woods of Alaska, where there was not much need to think about the death penalty. My family believed that capital punishment is an effective means to deter people from committing heinous crimes.
And to me, I go back, the only way that you can do that is you have to go back to the moral background. We have to go back to trusting God and trusting the Bible and relying on those things instead of ourselves, because ourselves always come up with the wrong answer.
This perspective worked well while I lived in Alaska, but when I left the state to attend college, I encountered perspectives that challenged me to rethink my position. Roberts Wesleyan College marked an opening in myself to the discovery of a multiplicity of lenses for the world. It was here that my perspective on capital punishment and violence in general drastically changed. After I graduated, I began working on my master's degree with Victor Villanueva. My MA work and research focused on the nature of violence and language, and I realized I had more questions than answers to most of the problems. Victor recommended me to the RCID program in Clemson, South Carolina, where he had recently sent another of his students, Jody Corley. Jody's story is connected in some ways to my own narrative and complicates the questions that I have about capital punishment. Before I look into her story, I want to illustrate the nature of the death penalty and the place where both Jody and I found ourselves after our individual stints at WSU. This takes me to South Carolina. In 2015, South Carolina was ranked 7th for number of executions to occur within a state. The state is also home to the youngest convict to be put to death. In 1944, a 14-year-old black boy, George Steiny, was accused, convicted, and executed for the rape and murder of a 7-year-old white girl. He was not given a lawyer. His trial lasted 2 hours. He was exonerated 70 years later. In 1983, not too far north, a black teenager, Henry McCollum, and his brother, Leon McCollum, were convicted of rape and murder. Henry was arrested because one of his classmates said he looked funny. He spent 30 years on death row before DNA evidence proved that both Henry and Leon were innocent.
Death penalty, I mean, it's one of those things that a lot of people don't think a whole lot about, but the more you start looking at it, the more troubling it gets, especially when we look at our racial history, you know, the legacy of slavery and racism. I mean, where executions are happening right now is exactly where lynchings were happening 100 years ago, and the states that have held on to the death penalty the longest are the states that held on to slavery the longest. 85% of executions in the last few decades have been in the Bible Belt. My buddy says the Bible Belt is the death belt. I think we've had a very narrow understanding of what it means to be pro-life. That means we should be the biggest champions of life when it comes to gun violence, the movement for black lives, resistance to militarism and war, and the death penalty.
The state is covered in memorials for those who have been wrongfully lynched and executed. These memorials suggest that we have overcome the abusive, racist nature of the past, yet stories like Henry McCollum's and George Steiny's suggest otherwise. Can the death penalty really serve as a deterrent for violent crimes if it, too, is a violent crime which kills innocent people? Let's look at the other side of the coin, at the story of Jody Corley, whose case might compel a jury to sentence the perpetrators to death. Jody Corley was a PhD student in the RCID program at Clemson University. She lived with her boyfriend, Scott Johnston, in Seneca, South Carolina. On January 2nd, 2014, two teenagers, one who lived across the street from Jody, broke into their home to steal guitars. They shot and killed Scott. Jody was tied up and shot in the foot. A few months later, Jody took her own life.
She actually was talking to me, and I looked across the street, and I said, "Do you know anything about those folks that live there in that home?" And she says, "Oh yeah, there's this young man that lives over there, and I've been really trying to help him. He comes over and he will eat dinner with us. She's trying to mentor him because she just wants to get him on the right path." It's kind of eerie because later on she was praising and bragging on this young man who eventually would kill her boyfriend. Just a few days later would kill her boyfriend and shoot her and tie her up and plan to kill her. You're certainly prepared to kill. So I can't say that they didn't. I can't say that they didn't or did not come there to kill. They had been doing some drugs earlier, so you really don't know what's going through a person's mind at that time. But they've definitely come prepared to kill. They were armed. And this good kid she was talking about, it basically led to her death indirectly. I do know we met with the family of Jody and the family of Scott. The first things that they were adamant about was they didn't want us to even consider the death penalty. And Jody was adamant about that. She did not want death penalty to be off the table at the time, and that's when we were meeting with also the solicitor. If someone had viciously killed my daughter or my son, I would have a different attitude than what his family did. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's how I was raised. Maybe it's my surrounding, the political beliefs of the community. You know, there's all kind of factors in there. But I don't know.
It's just to say that we can do better than killing to show that killing is wrong.
The ruling force of capital punishment has done little to deter people, like the boys in Jody's story, from committing violent acts. Taking the life of another will not revive the innocent people who were killed. No form of justice could revive the victims who have become a kind of sacrifice in an unjust system. What the death penalty has accomplished is the opposite of retribution. It too has taken innocent people. Maybe the answer to violence isn't violence. Maybe that answer looks more like Jody's answer. Maybe choosing the merciful answer instead of the violent answer would help us move away from killing entirely.